Dry Creek Valley was a place where only the stubborn survived. The sun beat down like a hammer, the wind carried dust sharp as needles, and the land itself seemed to dare anyone foolish enough to claim it. Clara Dalton knew all this and more. She had buried a father, 2 brothers, and most of her youthful dreams in the red dirt of this ranch. Now, standing on the sagging front porch, she watched the horizon through narrowed eyes, her hands rough and calloused, gripping the railing as if it might float her through the storm they were about to face. Behind her, Lucy Dalton hummed an old hymn while stitching a tear in her one good dress. Younger by nearly a decade, Lucy still carried a softness Clara could scarcely afford. Her blue eyes shone with hope, her voice lilting like a bird's even as the weight of a crumbling ranch pressed down on them both. Clara envied her sister's optimism, but knew it for the dangerous thing it was. They were losing the ranch. No prayers nor promises could change that. The cattle thinned every season, the fields baked to dust, and the bank, cold-eyed and impatient, had sent a final warning. Without money or muscle, Dry Creek Ranch would be nothing but a memory by the next winter. Clara had proposed the idea late one night, her voice low and grim as a funeral bell. They would send for mail-order husbands, men desperate enough for land or a new start to risk everything on a pair of stranded sisters. Lucy had resisted at first, believing in fairy tales and notions of true love. But desperation has a way of sharpening even the softest hearts, and by the next morning, 2 letters had been sent out west with trembling hands. The weeks dragged like injured dogs. Every sunrise was a question. Would the men come? Would they be kind? Would they save the ranch? Or would they bring new ruin? When the stagecoach finally rattled into Dry Creek, it brought with it more than dust and creaking leather. It carried fate itself, packed neatly in the frames of 2 strangers. Joshua Hart was the first to step down. He moved with a soldier's grace, broad-shouldered, sun-kissed, his easy smile cutting through the heavy heat like a welcome breeze. He swept off his hat and bowed to Lucy, who turned pink and stumbled over her greeting. His voice was warm, full of stories he had yet to tell, and his gaze lingered on Lucy with a tenderness that sent Clara's instincts prickling. The second man descended with less flair. Evan Burke was lean and weathered, with a half-healed scar slicing across one cheekbone like a jagged reminder. His eyes were sharp, unreadable, and he wore the dust of the road as if it belonged to him. He tipped his hat to Clara, said little, and watched everything. In that brief glance, Clara saw not romance, but survival. The town of Dry Creek noticed, of course. A gathering of farmers, storekeepers, and gossips lingered along the dusty street, whispering behind gloved hands and wide-brimmed hats. The Dalton sisters were headlines in a place starved for any scrap of drama. Clara ignored them. She had no time for vanity, only results. The weddings were simple affairs, vows exchanged under the cracked beams of the town's aging chapel, witnessed by a reluctant preacher and a handful of curious onlookers. Clara married Evan without ceremony or illusion. The handshake afterward felt more binding than any spoken words. Lucy and Joshua, by contrast, glowed with the feverish light of new hope, their hands clinging together like roots in a flood. At first, it seemed the plan might work. Joshua proved himself eager and strong, mending fences, soothing horses, laughing easily with Lucy as they worked side by side. Evan, though less friendly, was tireless in the fields, patching roofs, repairing wagons, moving through the long days with a grim efficiency Clara respected. For a moment, brief as a flash of lightning, Clara allowed herself to believe they might just survive. Then the small things began to happen. It started with a barn door found swinging open one morning, despite Clara's habit of double-latching it every night. Then a calf went missing, no tracks leading away from the pen, but a faint smear of blood in the dust. Tools vanished, reappeared broken. The wind carried strange whistles across the canyons at dusk, too measured, too deliberate to be natural. Clara's sleep grew restless, dreams shadowed by a creeping dread she could not name. She tried to dismiss it as the price of change, the natural friction of strangers folding into old routines. But somewhere deeper, in the bone-true part of herself that had weathered too many losses, Clara knew better. Late one evening, As Lucy and Joshua lingered by the creek under a rising harvest moon, Clara sat alone at the kitchen table, oil lamp flickering weakly against the encroaching dark. Evan came in, silent as smoke, and placed a bundle on the table. She unwrapped it to find an old tin badge, dulled with age, the word deputy barely legible across its battered face. "I wasn't always what I am now," Evan said, voice rough as gravel. "A long time ago, I tried to do right. Didn't stick." He didn't wait for her questions. He simply tipped his hat and left her there, staring at the tarnished symbol of a life abandoned. That night, restless, Clara climbed to the attic where her father's things lay gathering dust. She dug through brittle papers, old ledgers, moth-eaten coats, until she found what she hadn't known she was looking for, a collection of wanted posters, yellowed but still legible. One face stopped her cold. The likeness was rough, but unmistakable. Joshua Hart younger, hair shorter, smile absent. Wanted, the poster read, for robbery, fraud, and suspicion of murder. The paper crackled in her trembling hands. Outside in the distance, a coyote howled, long and low, and the desert night answered back with a shiver that rattled the window panes. Clara folded the poster carefully, tucked it into her pocket, and sat in the dark until the lamp sputtered out. Dawn would bring decisions, hard and merciless. But tonight, she stared out at the star-blasted sky, feeling the weight of the truth settle heavy on her shoulders. They had invited salvation onto their land, but it was betrayal that had crossed their threshold. The morning after Clara found the wanted poster, the desert seemed to breathe differently. The sun rose thick and red, bleeding across the land like a wound. Clara saddled her horse with shaking hands and made for town, leaving Evan and Lucy behind with promises she didn't bother to keep. She needed answers, and the only place she'd find them was in the sour whiskey breath of Dry Creek Sheriff. Sheriff Avery was an old man held together by faded pride and whiskey. He listened as Clara unfolded the crumpled poster on his desk, his fingers tracing the face of Joshua Hart as if seeing a ghost. "Name's not Hart," the sheriff muttered. "It's Caleb Hunt. Ran with the Claymore boys. Mean lot. Mostly disappeared after a big job went south. Didn't think he'd show his face in these parts." Clara's mouth went dry. "You need to arrest him." Sheriff Avery snorted, reaching for his glass. "Arrest him with what army? You think I'm itching for a bullet between the eyes? Claymore boys don't leave no one standing. You'd best run, girl. Take your sister and get." Clara left the sheriff's office, with more fear than answers, the town's dust swirling around her like a storm brewing just beyond sight. When she returned to the ranch, Evan was waiting on the porch, rifle balanced casually across his knees, eyes colder than the steel he held. "You found something," he said, not a question. Clara nodded. "It's worse than I thought." That night, Clara cornered Evan behind the barn, away from Lucy's unknowing smile and Joshua's polished charm. She laid the poster flat against the wall, watched Evan's reaction in the thin moonlight. He didn't flinch. "I knew who he was when I saw him," Evan admitted. "Didn't say nothing. Figure it wasn't my fight." "You brought a killer into my home." "I didn't bring him," Evan said. "He found you. Same as I did." The silence between them stretched, taut and dangerous. "I ain't the man I once was," Evan added, voice low. "But I know men like Caleb Hunt. He's here for more than a wedding ring." The Claymore boys had returned, only now they wore the faces of saviors. Within days, the signs became impossible to ignore. Cattle from neighboring ranches were driven off or butchered where they stood. Smoke curled from burned-out homesteads. Whispers filled Dry Creek's single saloon. The Claymore boys wanted the valley, wanted it cheap and empty. Those who didn't sell would be made to wish they had. One evening, Lucy returned from town with groceries and trembling hands. A note had been tucked into her basket, scrawled in rough pencil, "Sell or bleed." Clara burned the note, but not the fear it left behind. They gathered in the kitchen after sunset, oil lamp casting long, jittery shadows across the walls. Clara faced Joshua across the worn table, Evan leaning in the doorway like a silent judgment. "We're staying," Clara said. Joshua smiled, slow and patient, like a man humoring a child. It's not your choice anymore, sweetheart. Lucy flinched at his tone. The endearment turned ugly. You're with them, Clara said, the weight of her suspicion now a certainty. Joshua's smile widened, cold as a knife's edge. Never said I wasn't. Evan moved first, the rifle coming up smooth as breath, but Joshua was faster than he looked. He lunged, grabbing Lucy by the arm, a pistol appearing in his hand like a conjurer's trick. Put it down, Joshua warned, pressing the barrel against Lucy's temple. Or she dies first. Clara's heart pounded so loud, she could barely hear her own voice. She set her shotgun on the floor, hands raised, mind racing for any way out. Evan's rifle clattered beside hers. Joshua backed toward the door, dragging Lucy with him. Tomorrow, he said, you'll sign over the ranch. Make it nice and legal. Then maybe we'll let you ride away. Maybe. He kicked the door open and disappeared into the night. Lucy's terrified scream cut short by the slam of boots and the fading hoofbeats beyond. Evan retrieved his rifle and turned to Clara, jaw tight with fury. We have till morning, he said. Then they come for everything. They spent the rest of the night preparing. Evan moved with deadly purpose, showing a side of himself Clara had only glimpsed before. He taught her how to reload faster, how to aim for knees and wrists, to cripple rather than kill if it came to that. He mapped out the land, laying traps where the dry grass grew thickest, rigging ropes and hidden trenches where horses might break legs. Clara matched him stride for stride, blood pounding with a terrible clarity. She would not lose her sister. She would not lose this land. Not without a fight. As dawn's first light crept across the valley, Clara and Evan took positions behind the split-rail fence, the ranch house looming like a battered ship behind them. The Claymore boys rode in without fear, 10 strong, with Joshua at their head and Lucy tied to a horse's saddle horn. She looked small, bloodied at the lip but defiant. Clara's fingers tightened around her shotgun. Joshua reined in, grinning. Last chance, Clara. Sign it and walk away. Clara lifted her chin. Not today. The first shot cracked the morning air like a whip. Evan dropped one of the riders before the echo faded, the man tumbling from his horse in a cloud of dust. Chaos erupted. Gunfire shredded the quiet. Horses screamed. Men cursed and bled into the dirt. Clara fought like a woman possessed. She fired until her shoulder ached, reloaded, fired again. She saw Joshua spur his horse toward her, murder gleaming in his eyes, and leveled the shotgun at his chest. Evan was faster. A single, clean shot ripped Joshua from the saddle. He hit the ground hard, coughing blood, the pistol falling from his limp hand. The rest of the Claymore boys, seeing their leader broken, faltered. Some turned tail and rode hard for the hills. A few stubborn ones stayed, but Evan picked them off with grim precision. When the last man fell or fled, silence swept over the ranch like a final blessing. Clara dropped her shotgun and ran to Lucy, cutting her free with shaking hands. They clung to each other, the dirt and blood between them forgotten. Evan approached, rifle still in hand, eyes sweeping the horizon for any last threats. We're not safe yet, he said. Word'll get out. More might come. Clara straightened, wiping dust from her face. Then we'll be ready. Evan looked at her, something like respect deepening the lines around his eyes. You're tougher than most men I ever knew, he said. Didn't have much choice, Clara replied. They gathered the wounded horses, buried the dead in shallow graves at the canyon's edge, and burned what little remained of the Claymore boys camped beyond the ridge. It was grim work, but necessary. As they finished, the sun climbing high and merciless overhead, Clara realized they had crossed a line from which there was no return. They had won a battle, but the war for Dry Creek was just beginning. By the time the sun set over Dry Creek, the town knew what had happened at the Cooper Ranch. Word moved faster than wildfire across the open land. Some said a dozen outlaws had stormed the ranch, only to be beaten back by 2 women and a ghost from the old wars. Others swore the dead men still rode at night, their souls too angry to rest. Clara didn't care for the stories. She cared for the simple truth. Lucy was safe, their land was theirs, and Evan Burke had bloodied his hands to make it so. Evan moved around the ranch with a restlessness that unsettled the horses. Clara caught him one evening tightening the fence lines, every glance twitching toward the horizon like he expected another gang to come storming over it. "You planning to keep running?" Clara asked, arms crossed. Evan tied off the last, not with a sharp tug. "Ain't much left to run to." Clara stepped closer, studying him in the dimming light. There were scars along his knuckles, old burns riding the edge of his throat. His eyes held a weight she recognized now, something older than war or outlaw trails, something that had begun the day he'd first picked up a gun. "You were a soldier," she said quietly. He didn't answer right away. He pulled a crumpled cigarette from his coat, struck a match against the fence post, and drew in a breath like it might steady him. "Once," he said at last, "fought for the Union. Thought it'd make me a better man. And after," he smiled without mirth, "after, I just got better at surviving." The Claymore boys had been a test, but Evan had fought bigger battles, darker ones. Clara could see that now. He hadn't saved them out of heroism or duty. He'd done it because somewhere deep down, the part of him that was still human demanded it. Lucy came out onto the porch then, waving a piece of paper. "A letter came from town. Sheriff Avery wants to see us." Clara exchanged a glance with Evan. Trouble never traveled alone. They rode into Dry Creek the next morning, wary eyes tracking them from saloon doors and merchant windows. Clara felt the weight of the town's fear, the way people shrank back from them, whispering behind calloused hands. Inside the sheriff's office, Avery sat with his boots on the desk, a scowl etched deep into his weathered face. "You stirred up a hornet's nest," he said without preamble. "Claymore boys got friends. Meaner ones. Meaner and smarter." "We'll be ready," Clara said. Avery snorted. "You won't. Not for this." He tossed a badge onto the table between them. It slid to a stop near Evan's hand. "You want to stay? You want Dry Creek to stand? You're gonna need law. Real law. Not just shotguns and fences." Evan stared at the badge like it was a snake coiled to strike. His hand didn't move. "I ain't no lawman," he said. "You are now," Avery said. "Or you will be when they come looking for revenge." Clara held her breath, watching 1,000 things pass through Evan's eyes. Anger, guilt, weariness, and something else too. Resolve. He picked up the badge. Outside, the sky boiled with dark clouds, promising rain that hadn't come all season. Back at the ranch, Clara and Lucy worked alongside Evan to fortify the homestead. Fences were reinforced, extra supplies buried beneath floorboards. The old barn was turned into an armory, loaded with rifles, ammunition, and traps. But preparations could only stretch so far. One afternoon, a rider appeared on the ridge, a lone figure wrapped in a black duster, holding a white flag of parley. Evan met him at the gate, Clara flanking him with a rifle in hand. The man tipped his hat. His face was scarred, eyes dark as a snake's. "Name's Boone," he said. "You killed my brother at that shootout. Claymore blood don't dry easy." Evan said nothing. Boone continued, voice smooth and poisonous. "We're giving you till sundown tomorrow. You leave the ranch, you live. You stay, you die." Clara tightened her grip on the rifle, but Evan touched her arm, steady and silent. "We'll be ready," Evan said simply. Boone smiled, slow and hungry, then turned and rode back into the canyon. That night, the ranch became a fortress. Lucy, small and silent, moved between windows with a pistol tucked in her apron. Clara loaded and reloaded until her hands blistered. Evan mapped out their defenses with the precision of a general preparing for his final battle. As darkness swallowed the sky, Clara found Evan standing at the edge of the porch, staring out into the blackness. "You should have run," he said without turning. "So should you," she replied. He chuckled low. "Ain't no running left in me." They stood in silence, the storm above them crackling with distant thunder. When the attack came, it was swift and merciless. Boone and his men struck from 3 sides, hooves pounding the earth into chaos. Gunfire exploded like fireworks. Shouts and screams tore through the night. Clara fought with the cold efficiency Evan had drilled into her. She dropped one man trying to set fire to the barn, another who tried to cut through the fence. Lucy, hidden in the rafters, picked off a third with a single, trembling shot. Evan moved through the battlefield like death itself. He fought not for glory, but for survival. Every bullet a prayer, every step a refusal to yield. Boone made it to the porch, blood streaking his cheek, 2 pistols blazing. Clara ducked behind a barrel as splinters flew. Evan faced Boone head-on, revolver drawn. "You're dead, Burke." Boone snarled. "Maybe," Evan said, "but not today." The 2 men fired at the same instant. Boone staggered back, a blossom of red blooming across his chest. Evan took a bullet to the side but stayed standing, breathing hard. Boone collapsed into the dust, his last breath a ragged curse. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader fall, scattered like frightened coyotes. Silence returned, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors. Clara rushed to Evan, catching him as he sagged against her. Blood soaked his shirt, but he grinned through the pain. "Guess I'm sheriff after all," he said. They patched his wound as best they could. Lucy wept silently as she stitched his side, her hand steady even as tears streaked her face. Morning found them battered but alive. Dry Creek came out in force once they heard the gunfire had ended. They found Evan sitting on the porch, badge pinned crookedly to his coat, rifle across his lap. The townsfolk looked at him differently now. Not with suspicion, but with something closer to awe. Sheriff Avery stepped forward, hat in hand. "You saved us," he said gruffly. Evan shrugged. "Wasn't for you." His eyes found Clara and Lucy, standing proud despite the blood and the dirt. The legend of Evan Burke was born that day. They said he was a ghost, a man who could not be killed, a soul too stubborn to leave the earth. They told stories of the battle, each version grander than the last. But Clara knew the truth. Evan wasn't a legend because he couldn't die. He was a legend because, when death came calling, he chose to stand his ground. And in Dry Creek, that meant everything.